Lix here. Hello, everybody. Meet Jerry Gray, a former UK police officer who once guarded royals, policed riots, and rose to become a general manager at one of Australia's largest security firms, before trading it all for a new life in China. In this candid conversation, Jerry describes how his journey from the coal towns of England to the bustling streets of Guangdong reshaped his worldview, and why he believes much of what the West hears about China is simply wrong. And here's the twist. Jerry initially disliked China and fully intended to leave. What changed his mind? Let's find out. Welcome, Jerry. I'm excited to hear your story and get the real scoop on life in China beyond the headlines. But first, tell us, what was it like growing up in the UK and what led you to join the police at just 18?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's nice to finally come face to face with the great Felix. So we've been corresponding for about 5 years. So this is a good first experience for me. I joined the police. I grew up in the northeast of England. I was the grandson of a coal miner on one side of the family and an optometrist or optician on the other side of the family. And I grew up in fairly austere conditions in the late 50s. I was born, lived through the 60s. I don't remember them, not because of the drugs or psychedelia, but because of the fact that I was just too young. I was 10 when, I was 12 when the 60s ended. And when I was about 18, I had very little in the way of formal education. I left school at 15. I'd been working in a factory, and I wanted to kind of better myself. And so I applied to join the police. The police allowed us back in those days to join based on having a good character, being the right size, level of fitness. And, obviously you had to be intelligent enough to pass their training courses, but you didn't need bachelor degrees or anything like that. I never went to university at that stage of my life. So the police was a good opportunity to better myself, get a good job. It was a respected job in those days. And I actually really had this kind of internal view that I could help my community. So that was what drew me into the police. I joined the army as a 16-year-old boy soldier and hated it. So I went into the police with some trepidation. Whether I would hate it or not was right up there in the forefront of my mind. It turned out that I didn't hate it. I loved it. And I spent 10 years doing it and only left because my family moved to Australia. But that's a different story we'll come to later.
Okay, so during your time in the police, you also served in diplomatic and royal protection, even meeting Lady Diana along the way. That must have been an incredible experience. But when did you start feeling disillusioned with British society? And what ultimately led you to make the move to Australia?
Okay, well, I met Lady Diana. I never met her after she was Princess Diana. I stopped working with her on the day of her wedding at 6 o'clock in the morning. I finished work. I went to bed, and when I woke up, she was married, and I never saw her again, except on TV. What pushed me to Australia was a couple of different things. One is I was suffering some contradictions, serious contradictions in my own mind. I'd worked on the miners' strike. And as I mentioned, my grandfather was a miner, and I felt that there was a conflict there. I was doing the bidding of a conservative government when really I was kind of a socialist leaning person. I didn't realize this at the time. In fact, I didn't even realize I was socialist until I'd been in China about 10 years. And, well, this actually works. And I realized this worked because it makes sense, and it made sense to me even back then. I just didn't realize because I had no education to show me what socialism or Marxism or anything like that really was. Once I started understanding it, I got better at it. But that was the biggest dichotomy in my life, was being a police officer and fighting's not the right word, but supporting a government that wasn't supporting the system that I really thought should have been supported, that of the working class. And the other aspect of it was my local school where my son was going. He was 5 years old, started a new school, and I walked into school one day and they were handing out leaflets which were telling us that the school needed security and they were asking for donations. The donations didn't bother me, but the fact that my son's school needed security, that bothered me a lot. It told me that society was going in a bad way. And I went home disgusted and talked to my wife at the time, who had been brought up in Australia. And basically, she said, well, why don't we go back to Australia? That was it. That was how we ended up going back to Australia. So, yeah, I went to Australia in 1987 with a wife who had grown up there and two children. And the rest of my wife's family joined us in this period. Two of the sisters were already there. They were born in Australia and grew up there. And the mother and father had gone back to the UK with their three daughters, and two of them had taken up nationality and gone to Australia. My wife and I had to apply. We went through the process of a permanent resident application and were accepted. Went to live in Australia.
And in Australia, you went on to become the general manager of the country's largest security firm, correct?
At the time, it was Australia's largest. I think actually, sorry, it was Australia's second largest. It was CHUBB Security. They're a brand name, very well-known name. I didn't immediately become the general manager. I started my life as a security guard on the paint factory, the front gate of a paint factory in southern Brisbane. So anyone who knows Brisbane might know the Taubman's paint factory in Yeronga. I was the security guard on the front gate for several months, and then I moved through the ranks. I became a customer service person, then I became a salesperson, then I became a sales supervisor, then a sales manager, and then I was moved to Sydney as a national account manager. Then I moved to Adelaide to become a state manager, and then I moved back to Sydney to become a business development manager, which was my job there was acquiring smaller companies. Then one of the companies that we'd acquired, which was a traffic management business, I became the general manager of that because my background actually leaned towards it. I knew about the industry from being a police officer and being a parking enforcement manager. There's not a huge leap, and I understood the legislation behind it. Now, obviously, I didn't know all the laws, but I understood how the legislation works, how the process works. So they made me the general manager of CHUBB Traffic Management Services. And I apologize to anyone who got tickets as a result of my guys. I had a couple of hundred guys working under me in different cities around Australia where they had outsourced their parking management. So instead of having traffic wardens, as the governments used to have, we were subcontracted to do that. And we had some university campuses, some hospitals, and some local councils. And I was the general manager of that business until we were taken over. And then I became, this is a very big irony of my life, I became a victim of an acquisition. Having been the manager who acquired many businesses and made many smaller managers redundant, I then got caught up in the same trap when a much bigger company, United Technologies Corporation, UTC, which is now part of Raytheon, they acquired my business. They acquired our business, CHUBB Security, and then asked me, what do you plan to do? And I said, look, this business is not really suitable for you. You should sell it. And they said, if we sell it, we won't have a job for you. So I said, it doesn't matter. I had 17 years service. I was ready to go. I didn't really enjoy working for UTC. I had about 3 or 4 months working with them. I wasn't really very comfortable under their new, they had new policies and guidelines and laws. And I really wasn't enjoying my time anymore. So I already had lined up some buyers, and I sold the company in 2 different parts to 2 different buyers. So having been involved in acquisitions and now became the vendor, I sold the company and I was given a bonus, which was one thing I will thank UTC for. They were very good in that kind of respect. They don't treat their junior managers very well, but the higher up you go, the better your bonuses are, the better your chances of education. They're very keen on education. And for me, I didn't even have a bachelor's degree. I had diplomas, but I didn't have a bachelor's degree, and they wanted master's degrees. Anybody who was in a senior management level in any country that UTC operated should really be master's degree, MBA holders. And I hold a master's degree now, but I didn't then. And so I was they were pleased to see the back of me. I was pleased to see the back of them. And we shook hands and I walked out of the company with a nice package. I had my mobile phone, which had been mine for the last 10 years or more. The telephone number, I was allowed to keep it. I was allowed to keep the laptop computer that the company had given me because it was useless to them, but it was very important to me. And so I walked out of there and started thinking about what am I going to do for the rest of my life. And teaching and traveling, gaining this portable skill and traveling around the world using it was one option, and I decided to go that way.
When redundancy hit you, that's what inspired you to go back to school to earn a teaching diploma, right?
Yeah, I got a teaching certificate. It wasn't really back to university or anything like that. It was done through a center. Cambridge University has this certificate called the CELTA, the Certificate of English Language Teaching to Adults, and it just took 3 months to get. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't go back to university to study teaching as such. I just carried this CELTA. When I first applied for a job, the first job I applied for was in China, and I got it. I was one of 67 applicants. They were looking for someone who had a disciplinary background because they believed the students that I would be teaching were pretty rough kids and spoilt kids from rich families because it was going to be in an international school, and all of these kids were preparing for university. So I got the job and I came to China, and I'd say that it took me probably 2 classes to realize that I like this job teaching. I liked the kids that I was teaching. They were great. I liked the interaction between us. I really enjoyed the experience of being in a classroom. I did not enjoy the experience of being in China. I disliked China intensely. And I knew within a couple of hours of being in China that I'd been misled, misinformed. China was not like I was told it was, but that's a different story. What I really found was that I felt out of place. You go through culture shock when you move to a new country, and I think it's been defined. Psychologists have defined what culture shock really is. You get a first period of wow, wow, look at this, it's all so different, and that's exciting. It's interesting, and it keeps you occupied. But after a short period of time, you start to feel those differences, and you start to feel outside of your environment, and it's not something that I was very comfortable with. I couldn't speak Chinese at all, not a single word. I couldn't count to 10 in Chinese. I couldn't count to 3 in Chinese. I knew how to say hello, nothing more. Ni hao, that's all I could do. And so I found restaurants locally that had pictures. That was the only place to eat. And then the pictures were misleading because you'd point at a picture and say, I'll have that one. And they say, do you want it spicy or not spicy? Do you want rice or noodles with it? Do you want, and what? I don't know what you're saying. You're la bula. What's la bula? I don't know what la bula is. Is that what this meal is called? It means spicy or not spicy. Do you want noodles or rice? And I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. I just want that. And so I stopped going to restaurants and started eating in places like McDonald's or KFC because they had a card and you could just point at number 3 and say, I want that one, but I don't want cola. Now, the word cola in Chinese is ke. So they understood. I don't want cola, I want coffee. And the word for coffee in Chinese is cafe. So these are 2 words that I learned in Chinese. They're basically the same, but very few words in Chinese are the same as they are in English. So I would replace my cola with a coffee, and I thought I was getting away with this, speaking some Chinese. That was basically all I ate for a while. McDonald's, KFC. We had a Pizza Hut here, and the Pizza Hut was pizza everywhere, not great pizzas, but it was comfort food for me. And it got me into a place to sit down where I could actually eat something that I could recognize and see. And they didn't have to understand me because I could just point at a picture. And there was no questions. Do you want this spicy? Do you want But then there was also, what base do you want? Oh God. And then they'd show me a picture of 3 different bases. I go, that one. But that was it. That was how I found my way around for the first few months. And I really hated it. I didn't really enjoy China, and I was crossing off days on the list on the calendar just as to the day I could leave here and finish my contract and go home, which I really wasn't even sure I was ever going home, but go somewhere else. That was the plan. Then about 6 months in, they asked me to extend, and I thought that's a good idea because I'm starting to enjoy it. I had made some friends here. I had made some Chinese friends too. And Chinese people are extremely welcoming, and they would seek out someone who could speak English to help translate for them. And I met a girl who lived in my block of apartments who had been educated in Australia. She's only 20-year-old. We're still friends. She lives in Canada now, married with 2 children of her own, but we're still friends and we talk to each other often. And she visits her family and always we catch up. So yeah, she's well, she'd be 40 something years old now. So really surprising that I've still got friends from my very, very early days here in China, because that's how welcoming and friendly they are.
Talking about family, I mean, family clearly plays a big role in Chinese society. How is marrying a Chinese woman shaping your understanding of family life and culture?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I've been married now for 15 years. We got married in 2009 and very happily married as well, I have to add. I've married into a wonderful family who are extremely understanding. Not all families in China would be so understanding about a foreign son-in-law. And you know, my mother and father-in-law's only problem was it didn't matter. I'm a little bit older than my wife. I'm not very rich. I don't have a great job. I'm just a teacher. But my mother-in-law was also a teacher, and it's kind of a respected job. So they were quite happy with all of that. But a lot of families in China would be a little upset or concerned about marrying outside of the culture. Mine were not. Both my in-laws are extremely accommodating to me. They don't speak very good Mandarin, and my Cantonese is almost nil. I can say I don't speak Cantonese or Imse Kong Baha. And so I can say things like that, but I can't really communicate with my parents, so my in-laws. So we sit around the table and my wife acts as the translator. She's fluent in Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. So that's a good thing. The interesting thing about my family here in China is that my wife's one of 3 daughters. There's no brothers, there's just 3 daughters. And all 3 daughters are now married to Australians. That's something that I don't think any other family in China would probably have. I wrote an article called "Is This China's Most Unique Family?" and it was published in Guangdong in a Nanfang media group published this story because it's a Cantonese family and Nanfang is the southern region media group. So they published my article in English. And I believe it is probably China's most unique family in that respect. But yeah, we were the cause of that. My wife and I were the first, and we introduced her younger sister, who's a very good-looking young girl, to a very handsome young Australian guy who was working here as a teacher. At first, I was leery about that. I said, no, 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 no. He said, "Oh, your sister, your." Back then, it was my girlfriend's sister. Your girlfriend's sister's really cute. And I said, "No, stay away. No, don't go down that track." He said, "No, no, I'm serious. You know, I wouldn't mind dating her properly. I'm not just talking about having a drink or it's not like that. I really like the look of her, and she seems really intelligent, and she is a very very smart young girl." They're now married with 3 children, and they live in Brisbane. And the older sister was married before, got divorced, has a son, and basically, once you're divorced in China, you're kind of left on the shelf. But she met and is now married to my best friend, who is a 80-year-old Australian retiree who's been here almost as long as me.
You also, as you mentioned before, you have a master's in intercultural management. How did that influence your professional life in China?
Oh, it changed my life enormously. I went from being a teacher to being a trainer, being a consultant, and a couple of other things that I did. I did spend time as an examiner for the British Council working for the IELTS, the International English Language Testing System. So examining students mostly who were traveling to Australia or Canada or different English speaking countries, I mean, even America, but most Americans use a different exam system called the TOEFL. This is the testing of English as a foreign language. But the IELTS exam is huge. It's one of the biggest internationally recognized exams in the world, testing grading. And I got that job because I was qualified to do it. Prior to that, I wasn't actually qualified to do that job. So you needed to have a master's degree and a CELTA and a couple of other things, but I had all the qualifications. But I became a business consultant, and I tend to focus because it's cross-cultural change management. A lot of British companies in particular, and a couple of Swiss companies employed me to come in and teach their managers, because Western management philosophies and Chinese workplace psychologies are very different things. How the Chinese see their managers is very different to how Western managers see their employees. And so I had to teach Chinese supervisors who dealt with Western managers, and I had to teach Western managers who dealt with Chinese employees. And that was a different form of training. That was more consultancy, it wasn't teaching. It was understanding the differences between these two things, which had a huge barrier between them, not just language barrier, cultural barriers as well. So, in China, there's a very, very strict hierarchical management system. The boss is the boss. In the company, the boss is God. Simple as that. And very often that boss is a small family. It's a family-owned company, and maybe a huge company, but it's a family-owned company. Now, when it's not a family-owned company, it's quite often a state-managed company, and they're even worse in terms of how you manage the cultures. So you might have a foreign manager working in a state-owned enterprise and really not getting along with his colleagues, not getting along with his workplace. It just really is very, very difficult, his or her place, because quite a lot of them are females. And it needed someone to come in and bridge this gap between them and say, well, look, this went wrong. And then we'd find the reasons why things went wrong, and we'd try and train, instigate a training course, a training program to manage that particular problem. So that was a really interesting time for me. I traveled a lot in China doing that, and I worked locally with the Swiss Chamber of Commerce and the AmCham and a couple of others to try and work in helping people, the Australian Chamber of Commerce as well. And I just did some, basically that was just small localized jobs, but it helped some people quite a lot. One guy in Zhongshan, where I live now, changed his entire management philosophy as a result of me going in there and saying, you're doing it wrong. Sorry about that, but you are. And he's doing much better now as a result of it. So yeah, it does work. And when you start looking at the differences between this philosophy for managers and the culture for workers, there are huge gaps, and they needed to have bridges built. So that was something I enjoyed doing.
As the saying goes, sleeping in the same bed and dreaming different dreams.
Well, you must have experienced it. You live in Vietnam. You must have experienced it yourself. The day that you say, why the hell did they do that? I told them to do this. Well, there's always a reason. And it's not disobedience, generally speaking. I mean, it could be disobedience. It could be as simple as that. But generally speaking, it's not. It's a lack of understanding of what the process required. The usual thing was, I would talk to an employee, and the employee would say something along the lines of, well, he knows I can't do that. Why did he ask me to do it? And I'd say, well, he doesn't know you can't do it. Well, you must do. He's my manager. This is what they believe. The worker would say, but he's the manager. He should know. He doesn't know how to do it because I do it. And even one case, I had a CEO teaching a cleaner how to clean a floor properly, the way the CEO wanted the floor to be cleaned, because it wasn't just a bucket of dirty water slopped around. He wanted every 20 or 30 meters, you change the water, you add some disinfectant, and then you clean the floor like that. She would not do it. She would not do it. And I had to explain to her what the manager's understanding was, but I had to explain to the manager that she's a cleaner and you're a CEO. She cleans, and she's been doing it for 40 years. And what you're telling her is how to do her job. What you need to understand is it's not about how to do your job. It's about how we retrain people to do the job we want them to do. Different job. I'm going to retrain you now. I'm not going to teach you how to clean floors. I'm going to retrain you so that you become a hygiene inspector or something like that. And they get a promotion and they're still cleaning floors. So it works quite well. You need to give them a bit of extra money as well. You want me to use chemicals? Chemicals can be dangerous to me. Okay, we'll pay you an extra 3 RMB an hour or something like that. It's not going to be expensive, but it is going to be fantastic when you realize how easily it can be done. There's different ways to do it. And it's not discipline. It's not forcing. We had again, the same company had a cleaner got fired. The guy called me in because he was having so much trouble with his cleaning staff. They wouldn't do what he wanted them to do. A cleaner got fired because he'd asked them to clean the verge outside of his factory. He said, well, that's not our responsibility. That's the government's responsibility. And she was right. What he needed to do was complain to the government that the verge was dirty. All he needed to do was that. And he did, and they came and they cleaned it. That's the local government. They will do it. They didn't know it needed to be done because no one had told them. Once they were told, it's fixed. He got what he wanted, she got what she wanted. So, yeah, they had arguments between the cleaning staff and the CEO.
That's a wrap with Jerry Gray. But the story doesn't end here. From cycling thousands of kilometers during China's lockdowns to uncovering the realities behind social credit, censorship, and governance, Jerry's experiences will challenge everything you think you know. Catch the earlier episodes. China's total lockdown exposed. Social credit, censorship, and protests. Myths versus reality. China's dictatorship, or how people's representation works. Don't miss out. Jerry's journey is full of surprises. Links are below. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.